Forget what you've seen in Hollywood movies. Medieval battles weren't epic duels or noble last stands at all. They were absolutely terrifying in real life. It all starts with you getting shoved into a field with hundreds, maybe thousands of other sweating, grunting, terrified men, packed so tight that you can barely lift your arms. You're holding a wooden shield and a sword, or maybe just a sharpened farming tool. There's no battle strategy, so all you hear are the sounds of men charging at each other, weapons hitting flesh, bones breaking, and the screams of men getting killed in front of you. You're swinging your sword blindly, not because you're trained to do so, but because it's the only thing keeping you alive, and you're really just doing so on instinct. Half the time, you don't even know if you're hitting the enemy or the men on your own side. It's all starting so bad that the air stinks of blood and thick dust, while the mud underneath your feet is soaked with urine and the blood of men who have fallen dead. There are no timeouts or one-on-one duels with honor codes. If you trip or your weapon breaks, you know you're done. You'll fall and won't get a chance to stand up. You'll get stomped, stabbed, or trampled to death. Even the heavily armored knights aren't safe. One good hit to your helmet could destroy your brain or snap your neck. Unlike what movies nowadays portray, most soldiers weren't trained professionals. They were poor farmers forced into military service, barely understanding how to hold a sword properly. So if you were a peasant back then, you would have completely dreaded battle. Most foot soldiers weren't warriors by choice. They were conscripted from fields and villages, handed a spear or rusty axe, and told to hold the line. They didn't even have armor unless they found it on a corpse on the battlefield. You could have a quilted gambeson, which is a thick, padded coat that soaked up sweat, mud, and blood, but that was it. If you were lucky, a couple of days of drills, but it usually isn't more than that because most battles were sudden, and so was the selection of the local men to fight on the battlefield. You were chosen to stand in the front row and die first, getting the enemy's charge so the rich, armored knights behind you could shine. Some battles saw more than 80% of foot soldiers dead by the time they ended, so the first hour was all most men got. It was even worse during cavalry charges where men stood with their fellow villagers, holding long wooden pikes, while horses the size of small trucks galloped straight at them. If any of the men didn't hold the line, they would get trampled. If they held it, the shock could snap their arms, and if the line broke, it would quickly become a massacre. The sad part about this is that none of them could run from the battle because they would probably get cut down by their own side for desertion, so they were expected to stand and die. No one remembered their name or wrote songs about them. When the battle ended, their bodies would be looted, burned, or buried in a pit. If you're lucky enough to survive the first clash, best believe the second will be very brutal enough to take you out. A disease might even finish the job if the second battle doesn't. Since infected wounds and dysentery were very common in camps, no armor can save you. To make matters worse, no form of protection can fully shield you. People love to imagine knights as fearless men with sharp blades and shining armor plates. But the truth is, armor had limits, and medieval weapons evolved specifically to destroy it. Maces were made to crush helmets, war hammers could drive metal into bone, and halberds, which were brutal polearms with axe blades and hooks, could remove a knight from his horse and split him open right through the armor. Getting hit by an English longbow was a death sentence. These weren't ordinary arrows. They were over 3 feet long, shot from bows with up to 180 pounds of draw weight. That kind of power could send an arrow clean through a man's body, even through armor, and if you were on horseback, it could pierce through both you and your horse in a single shot. Then, there are the kinds of sounds you hear on the battlefield. You certainly wouldn't hear dramatic music in the background like Hollywood portrays. You would only hear metal slamming into skulls, ribs snapping, and the awful animal-like yelling of men who are bleeding out in the mud. Horses scream as they are speared or slashed open, and all of this disturbing noise is constant because there are no breaks on a true battlefield. You can't even take a second to hear your own thoughts. If you drop your weapon or panic for just a second, you'd either get trampled by your own men or shoved into enemy blades. And if the terror ends up getting to you, so you turn and run for your life, some commanders will have archers shoot their deserters in the back. Others might give orders to cut you down without question. This is because running didn't just mean failure, it meant betrayal, and betrayal was punished. You are expected to stand your ground in the middle of all the chaos, no matter how scared you are or what body parts are flying past your face. Hollywood lied about the sword. Sadly, the mere look of the sword is enough to make you give up. Unlike the props in Hollywood, real medieval swords were designed to kill fast and ugly. You'll be shocked to hear that the blades dulled quickly because of how much pressure they got under, often getting jammed between ribs or stuck in skulls. If that happens while you're on the battlefield, you know never to waste time trying to pull it out, so you let it go and grab whatever is nearby. It's common to find maxes, axes, or hammers in the mud after they were dropped by fallen soldiers. Besides swords, these were used as weapons because maces shattered bones, axes chopped through limbs, and hammers crushed armor and skulls. Even broken shields or rocks were used as weapons in times of need. Warriors used whatever they could swing, stab, or bash with, because a single moment of hesitation meant death. And don't think everyone on the battlefield even had a sword. In medieval times, swords were very expensive, so foot soldiers often used spears, clubs, or even farming tools that had been converted into makeshift weapons. Even knights rarely relied solely on swords. Close combat was about strength, speed, and ruthlessness, not style. So they weren't trying to defeat their opponents with skill, they were trying to maim them before the opponents could do the same. It was kill or be killed, and if that meant caving in someone's face with a heavy chunk of wood, then so be it. You might think surviving the battle itself was the worst of it, but that was just the beginning. Let's say your leg gets stabbed by a sword, or it gets pierced by an arrow. You're alive, yes, but in the medieval world, that doesn't mean you are safe. There are no antibiotics, painkillers, or understanding of germs. If the wound becomes infected, and it almost always does in such cases, you can then expect fever, swelling, and pus for the next few days or even weeks, until your body either recovers or succumbs to the infection. In medieval times, amputations were done with a saw, with no anesthesia, and often by someone with poor medical training. Survive that, and you might still die from sepsis anyway. Something as simple as a small cut could turn fatal. Flies would lay eggs in your wounds. Dirty bandages would spread more bacteria. Vultures would quickly be at the battlefield once it ended, chewing through the skin of dead men. There were no cleanup crews or proper burials for most. Some corpses lay there for weeks, stripped of any form of valuables by looters and picked at by carnivorous birds until they were nothing but bones. The lucky ones got dragged by passers-by into a shallow mass grave. If not, they were left to rot. There were no battlefield hospitals. What they have are often tents filled with screaming, dying men, with blood-soaked floors and no tools except knives and fire. Some soldiers end up dragging themselves home only to die in their sleep days later, in pain. In fact, more medieval soldiers died after battles than during them, and that's the part no one tells you about the slow, drawn-out suffering of the medieval battlefield. In cases like this, you can't hear your commander or see past the man in front of you, and with everyone screaming, bleeding, and wearing similar-looking gear, it's a recipe for disaster. Historical records are full of incidents where whole units turned on each other in confusion. Some battles were lost not because of the enemy but because men mixed sides and started killing their own. As the battle starts to end, you eventually get captured by the enemy. Don't expect a typical prison cell and 3 meals a day like you see in Hollywood. In medieval times, being taken alive often meant your nightmare was just beginning. Enemy soldiers were burned alive for sport. Ears, noses, and genitals were sliced off to send messages to the opposing troops, and if they got lucky enough to be ransomed, they would still be maimed to make sure they never fought again. The unlucky got a slow death, and public executions were used to terrify the enemy and entertain the crowd. Civilians didn't have it any better. Once an army took a city or village, it was open season for plunder. Women were raped, homes got burned, and children were slaughtered. Looting wasn't discouraged as it was part of a soldier's payment. Entire towns were wiped off the map simply because they stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. There were no human rights, international courts, or consequences. Soldiers could do the unthinkable and be rewarded for it. Some commanders even ordered atrocities to break the enemy's spirit. Such war crimes are common, and nobody can stop them. PTSD existed before it had a name. If you survive this with all your limbs, the war horror won't leave you whole. In the medical times, veterans returned home with a lot more than scars. They were broken inside. You'd see men flinch at every sound, lash out without warning, or go silent for days, lost in the horrors stuck in their heads. There was no name for this mental disorder and no therapy, only the assumption that something inside them had snapped. They were called madmen or cursed, but what they really were was traumatized survivors of something the human mind was never built to handle. Some drank themselves into oblivion to forget, while others wandered off into the woods, refusing to speak to anyone. Many couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the dead or hearing the screams of the battlefield in their dreams. It didn't matter how brave they'd been in the fight because trauma didn't care. It haunted the strong just as much as the weak. Back then, they had no words for what we now call PTSD, but the symptoms were there in their trembling hands, blank stares, and constant need for solitude. So let's be honest. The average modern person wouldn't make it 60 seconds in a real medieval battle. We're simply not built for it. Most people today have never even held a real weapon, let alone used one under life or death pressure. You wouldn't know how to block, charge, or breathe in full armor. Your ears would ring from all the screaming, your legs would be unstable in the mud, and the first time you saw someone's insides spill out, you'd either freeze or throw up. That's all it would take. That 1 second of hesitation and a sword or spear is already in your gut.